Power doesn't always walk into a room loud. Sometimes it sits quietly, watches everyone else destroy each other, and then decides who gets to live with the consequences. Season 3 of Landman is not just another chapter in the oil business story. It's a shift, a turn in tone, in focus, and in danger. In the earlier seasons, the show made things feel clear. There were greedy executives, reckless deals, and men who thought power meant being the loudest voice in the room. Conflict came from clashes, anger, ego. Everyone knew who the bad decisions belonged to, but Season 3 quietly removes that comfort. Now the danger doesn't come from shouting matches or risky deals made in public. It comes from calm choices made behind closed doors. It comes from people who don't look dangerous at all. And this is where everything changes. Because in Season 3, the fight is no longer about oil fields or profit margins. It's about control. Who pulls the strings? Who decides what risks are acceptable? And more importantly, who gets blamed? When things go wrong, this season strips away the idea that chaos is the biggest threat. Instead, it shows us something far more unsettling: order, clean decisions, polite conversations, and plans that are designed to protect power, not people. That's why Season 3 feels colder, heavier, more uncomfortable. The show stops asking who is right and starts asking who survives. It begins to show how systems don't need loud villains to hurt people. They only need someone willing to look away. And that's where Cammy becomes important. Up until now, Cammy has existed on the edge of the story, never the center of conflict, never the one throwing threats or raising her voice. She has always been presented as the steady presence, the reasonable one, the person who understands the cost of bad decisions. But Season 3 reframes her role completely. Instead of reacting to chaos, Cammy starts shaping it, not with force, but with timing. Not with commands, but with silence. She doesn't rush. She doesn't panic. She waits for moments when everyone else is desperate enough to listen. This is what makes Season 3 different. The show begins to explore how the most dangerous people are not the ones who make mistakes. They are the ones who let mistakes happen because the outcome works in their favor. Deaths in this season don't feel sudden or shocking. They feel inevitable, like a chain reaction that no one bothered to stop. And that's the scariest part. Because when tragedy happens, there's no clear hand to point at. No villain standing over the damage. Just decisions that made sense. To someone, Season 3 forces the audience to question something uncomfortable. What if the real threat isn't greed or anger, but calm logic without empathy? What if the worst harm comes from people who believe they're simply doing what must be done? This is the ground Season 3 stands on, a world where power is quiet, consequences are distant, and responsibility is always pushed onto someone else. And inside this world, Cammy doesn't need to become loud or cruel to become dangerous. Cammy was never written as a weak character. She was written as a quiet one. From the very beginning of Landman, her power didn't come from authority or position. It came from awareness. She listened more than she spoke. She watched people reveal themselves through stress, greed, and fear. While others fought to be seen, Cammy stayed just outside the spotlight, letting everyone assume she wasn't a threat. That assumption is the foundation of her rise. In earlier seasons, Cammy's silence was read as restraint. Viewers saw her as someone with a moral line, someone who understood the human cost of the oil business even if she couldn't always stop it. When chaos erupted, she wasn't the one causing it. She was the one standing nearby, reacting calmly, often offering solutions after damage was already done. This made her feel safe, trustworthy, almost protective. But silence is never neutral. It's a choice. As the seasons progressed, small details began to matter. Cammy didn't interrupt bad ideas early. She didn't challenge reckless decisions when she had the chance. Instead, she waited, not because she didn't see the danger, but because intervening too soon would expose her hand. Letting others fail created openings she could later step into. This is where her evolution truly begins. Cammy learns the system by letting it run. She studies how blame moves, how responsibility is passed downward, and how consequences rarely reach the people at the top. She sees that survival in this world isn't about being right. It's about being insulated, protected by layers of distance and clean explanations. So she adapts. Rather than fighting power directly, Cammy aligns herself close enough to influence it, but far enough to avoid ownership of its worst outcomes. She becomes someone others rely on for clarity, not realizing that clarity itself can be shaped. By the time people notice patterns forming, decisions have already been made. Season 3 pushes this transformation forward. Circumstances change. Bold. Leadership weakens. Confidence turns into desperation. And suddenly, Cammy's calm presence becomes essential. People start asking her what to do, not because she demands control, but because she feels like the only one who understands the full picture. That's the shift. She moves from observer to architect. Her power no longer comes from reacting wisely after chaos. It comes from setting conditions where chaos works to her advantage. She doesn't create disasters outright. She allows risky pots to stay open. She delays interference. She frames dangerous options as necessary ones. And when things go wrong, she isn't blamed because she never forced the choice. Cammy's evolution is subtle, but it's deliberate. She stops seeing herself as part of the problem and starts seeing herself as the solution, even when that solution costs lives. In her mind, people become numbers, outcomes become statistics. Loss becomes acceptable if it protects stability at the top. What makes this transformation unsettling is that nothing about her behavior feels dramatic. There's no sudden cruelty, no emotional outburst, just a steady narrowing of concern, a quiet decision to prioritize structure over humanity. By Season 3, Cammy isn't acting out of fear or anger. She's acting out of belief that she understands the system better than anyone else, belief that her choices prevent greater collapse, belief that sacrifice is unavoidable as long as it isn't hers. Cammy's greatest advantage has never been money, position, or influence. It has always been perception. People believe she is fair, they believe she is careful, and most importantly, they believe she has limits. This belief allows her to move freely without suspicion, even as her decisions begin shaping outcomes in darker ways. Throughout the series, Cammy is framed as the voice of reason, one tempers flare. She stays calm when others rush toward risky deals. She slows the conversation. This creates an image of someone who values safety and balance. Over time, that image becomes armor. No one questions motives when the person appears morally grounded. But morality can be performed. Cammy understands that people don't look for proof of goodness. They look for comfort. And she provides it through tone, body language, and timing. She doesn't push ideas aggressively. She introduces them gently, wrapped in concern and logic. By the time others agree, they believe the idea was their own. This is how trust becomes a tool. Instead of commanding loyalty, Cammy collects it. She listens to frustrations. She validates fears. She positions herself as the only one who truly understands the risks everyone else ignores. In doing so, she becomes the safe place where doubt is allowed and then quietly redirected. Her morality feels real because she never lies outright. She simply omits. She focuses on certain details while letting others fade into the background. When danger is discussed, she speaks in general terms. When consequences are raised, she distances herself from the specifics. This keeps her hands clean while still guiding the direction of events. Season 3 leans heavily into this dynamic. As pressure increases and mistakes pile up, people become desperate for stability. Cammy steps into that gap. She offers calm plans. Framed as damage control rather than ambition, she presents difficult choices as unavoidable, positioning herself as the one willing to make them for the greater good. This is where the illusion becomes dangerous, because once someone is seen as moral, their decisions are rarely challenged. Questions feel unnecessary. Doubt feels disloyal. Even when outcomes are harmful, the assumption is that there was no better option. That assumption protects Cammy more than any contract or legal shield ever could. She doesn't need to defend herself. Others do it for her. What makes this illusion so effective is that Cammy believes it too. She doesn't see herself as a villain. She sees herself as responsible, as someone doing what others are too weak or too emotional to do. In her mind, restraint has been replaced with necessity. And necessity excuses everything. By positioning herself as morally sound, Cammy avoids the emotional weight of her choices. She doesn't see faces when consequences hit. She sees systems stabilizing. She sees crises contained. The human cost becomes abstract, something acknowledged but never truly felt. This distance allows her to escalate without resistance. People trust her because she never appears hungry for power. But power doesn't always look like hunger. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like someone waiting for others to fail before stepping forward with clean hands and reasonable solutions. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the damage is already done. Not because Cammy moved too fast, but because she moved so slowly that no one noticed the direction. Season 3 marks the moment when the balance of power in Landman quietly tilts, not because someone stages a takeover or announces a bold move, but because the people who once held control begin to crack, confidence fades, mistakes pile up. And in that weakness, space opens for someone who has been waiting. Cammy doesn't rush into that space. She steps into it slowly, almost carefully. As if she doesn't want to disturb the structure she plans to reshape, she understands that power taken too openly invites resistance. Power assumed gently feels natural, even necessary. As leadership around her starts to falter, Cammy becomes the constant. While others react emotionally, she remains composed. While others defend their past choices, she speaks about future stability. This contrast makes her feel like the only adult in the room, the only one thinking clearly. That perception changes everything. People begin to defer to her without being asked. Meetings turn toward her for confirmation. Decisions are paused until she weighs in. Not because she demands authority, but because she has trained everyone to believe she sees further ahead than they do. This is the power shift. Cammy no longer waits for chaos to finish before responding. She starts guiding it. She influences timing. She decides when information is shared and when it's withheld. A delayed warning here, a softened concern there. Each small adjustment pushes events in a direction that benefits her long-term position. What's important is that none of this looks like control on the surface. Season 3 shows how influence becomes most effective when it feels invisible. Cammy rarely gives direct orders. Instead, she frames scenarios, she presents limited options, she nudges conversations toward conclusions that seem logical, even unavoidable. When someone else makes the final call, she remains untouched by responsibility. And when things go wrong, they do go wrong. Accidents, miscalculations, and chain reactions begin to surface. Losses occur that could have been prevented if someone had intervened earlier. But intervention was delayed, warnings were softened, risks were labeled manageable, and now the cost is real. Cammy isn't shocked by this. She anticipated it. In her mind, these outcomes are the price of maintaining control. Chaos is dangerous, but instability is worse. She believes that allowing certain failures protects the larger structure, that sacrificing a few keeps the system alive. This belief hardens her. Season 3 makes it clear that Cammy is no longer standing behind the curtain. She's just learned how to move it without being seen. Her presence shapes every major turn, even when her name isn't attached to the decision. The shift becomes most visible in how others change around her. People stop challenging her suggestions. They stop questioning the risks she downplays. Her calm becomes a signal that everything is under control, even when it isn't, and that's the danger. Because once power becomes normalized, it stops being examined. Cammy doesn't need to justify herself anymore. Her past image does that. For her, the moral authority she built now shields her from scrutiny. Even as the consequences of her influence grow heavier, Season 3 doesn't show Cammy becoming ruthless overnight. It shows something more realistic and more frightening, a person who realizes they can shape outcomes without consequences and decides to keep going. This is the moment where control fully replaces conscience, and from here on, the damage is no longer accidental. It's structural. Season 3 reaches a point where the consequences of Cammy's influence can no longer be ignored. Up until now, damage has been easy to dismiss. Lost money, broken trust, quiet cover-ups. But this is where the cost becomes human. This is where decisions stop being abstract and start leaving bodies behind. What makes these moments disturbing is that nothing about them feels sudden. There is no dramatic turning point where Cammy chooses violence. Instead, there is a pattern of delay, silence, and selective action that slowly builds toward disaster. Every warning that goes unanswered, every risk labeled acceptable, every chance to intervene that is quietly passed over. Cammy doesn't pull the trigger. She doesn't issue fatal orders. She allows dangerous paths to remain open because closing them would disrupt the balance she's protecting. In her calculations, intervention carries a price she isn't willing to pay, and so she waits. When the first deaths occur, they are framed as accidents, a misjudgment, a situation that escalated too fast. This framing is important because it shields Cammy from immediate blame. The system absorbs the shock, assigns responsibility to lower levels, and moves forward. Cammy watches all of this unfold without visible reaction. Internally, this is the moment where her transformation locks in. Not because she enjoys the outcome, but because she accepts it. The deaths confirm something she already believed, that the system demands sacrifice, that someone always pays. The only question is who. From this point on, Cammy's decisions change. In tone, she becomes more precise, more careful about distance. She doesn't get closer to danger, she steps further back, ensuring that consequences fall away from her position. She understands now that harm doesn't weaken her control, it strengthens it. People around her feel the shift, even if they can't name it. Conversations become more guarded. Fear settles into the background, but instead of challenging her, they cling to her, because if someone must be in control, better it be the person who seems calm. This is how blood becomes leverage. Each death reinforces the idea that stability must be protected at all costs. That questioning leadership only invites more chaos. Cammy doesn't say this out loud. She doesn't have to. The fear does the work for her. What makes these losses even darker is how cleanly they are explained away. Reports are written. Statements are prepared. Language is chosen carefully to remove emotion from the story. Words like incident and failure replace names and faces. Cammy participates in this process without hesitation. This is where her morality fully fractures. She no longer sees death as a line that can't be crossed. She sees it as evidence that the system is working as designed. Brutal, yes, but efficient, and once death becomes acceptable, everything else becomes negotiable. Season 3 uses these moments to show how evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, dressed as responsibility. Sometimes it hides behind calm explanations and shared grief that feels rehearsed. Cammy doesn't need to be cruel to be guilty. Her crime is choosing control over intervention, order over compassion, silence over action. The first blood isn't just a turning point for the story. It's the moment Cammy proves to herself that she can live with the cost, and that realization is what truly makes her dangerous. By the time Season 3 moves deeper into its story, it becomes clear that Cammy doesn't need force to get what she wants. Violence is messy. It draws attention. It creates emotional reactions that are hard to control. Cammy avoids all of that. Her power comes from something far quieter and far more effective: manipulation. Cammy understands people. She knows their fears, their weaknesses, and the stories they tell themselves to sleep at night. She listens carefully, not to respond, but to store information. Every complaint becomes leverage. Every moment of doubt becomes a future opening. While others focus on short-term wins, Cammy plays the long game. She rarely tells people what to do. Instead, she frames situations so that only one choice feels reasonable. She presents options with different levels of risk, guiding others toward the outcome she wants while making them feel in control. When a decision backfires, the responsibility belongs to the person who made it, not the one who shaped it. This is why she stays clean. Cammy also uses timing as a weapon. She knows when to speak and, more importantly, when to stay silent. A delayed warning can be just as powerful as a direct lie. By holding back information until the moment it's least useful, she allows events to unfold in predictable ways. Predictability is power. Season 3 shows her turning allies into shields without them realizing it. She positions certain people closer to danger, knowing they will absorb the fallout if things collapse. These individuals believe they are being trusted. In reality, they are being exposed. What makes this manipulation so effective is how reasonable it feels. Cammy never sounds extreme. She never pushes panic. Her language is careful, calm, and full of concern. She speaks about balance, risk management, and long-term stability. These words soften the reality of what's being done, and people believe her because believing her is easier than facing the truth. Cammy also understands the value of emotional distance. She doesn't form deep attachments that could cloud her judgment. When relationships become inconvenient, she lets them fade. When loyalty becomes a liability, she redirects it. Everyone around her serves a function, even if they don't realize it. This doesn't make her heartless in the traditional sense. It makes her efficient. Season 3 presents a world where efficiency is rewarded, even when it destroys lives. Cammy thrives in that environment. She doesn't break rules, she bends them. She doesn't threaten, she implies, and she doesn't act. Alone, she orchestrates. The most unsettling part is that she rarely needs to repeat herself. Once people understand the pattern, they adjust their behavior automatically. Fear and trust blend together, creating obedience without orders. This is why Cammy is more dangerous than any violent antagonist in the series. Violence can be traced. Manipulation disappears into conversation, into meetings, into decisions that feel shared.